All right, so let's dive right into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
It seems like even after all these years, it's a story that continues to fascinate people and spark debate.
Absolutely. I mean, we all know the basic facts, right? November 22nd, 1963.
Dallas, Texas.
A motorcade,
Yeah.
an open car, and then shots ring out.
Lee Harvey Oswald's arrested, but then before he can stand trial, he's shot and killed by Jack Ruby.
It's a story that's filled with twists and turns.
It really is,
Right.
Almost like something a Hollywood screenwriter would come up with.
Exactly. And what makes it even more compelling, I think, is that despite the official conclusion that Oswald acted alone, most of the public has never really fully bought it.
No, they haven't. There's always been this kind of lingering sense that there's more to the story.
Yeah,
That maybe, just maybe, we haven't been given the whole truth.
exactly. And that's what we're going to explore today. Some of the most intriguing evidence and arguments put forth by those who believe there was a conspiracy at play.
Sounds good.
We're going to be looking at, first, whether there was a potential cover-up. Then we'll examine the possibility of multiple gunmen. And then finally, we'll take a look at some of the most prominent conspiracy theories themselves.
So we're kind of piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
We have some of the pieces, but some are still missing.
Right.
And even the pieces we do have, they don't always seem to fit together neatly.
Nope.
So our goal today is to try to make sense of it all, to see if we can maybe discern any patterns or connections that might help shed light on what really happened that day in Dallas.
Okay, so let's start by examining the idea of a potential cover-up. Right from the beginning, there were certain details surrounding the investigation that raised red flags for a lot of people.
Yeah.
For instance, why was FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover so adamant about convincing the public that Oswald acted alone even before the investigation had been completed?
I mean, his eagerness to pin it all on Oswald before all the facts were in definitely seems curious. And then there's the strange case of someone impersonating Oswald in calls to the Soviet and Cuban embassies just weeks before the assassination.
That's right, in Mexico City.
Yeah.
Now, those details alone don't necessarily prove a conspiracy, but they do make you question the level of transparency and thoroughness of the official investigation.
For sure. And those doubts are only amplified when you consider some of the claims made by researchers who have spent years going over the evidence.
Right.
They point to numerous witness testimonies that seem to have been either ignored or downplayed by the Warren Commission, the official body tasked with investigating the assassination.
And there's a ton of examples, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like you have Jean Hill, a witness who always maintained that she saw a shooter on the grassy knoll, which of course contradicts the official narrative. And she claimed that she was intimidated and harassed after coming forward with her account. Which, if her claims are true, that raises serious concerns about whether certain testimonies were deliberately suppressed to fit a predetermined conclusion.
Right. It makes you wonder if they were trying to control the narrative.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of just straight up missing evidence, which further fuels speculation about a cover-up.
Like what?
Well, there are all these reports of confiscated films and photographs that were never returned to their owners. And a huge number of documents relating to the assassination remain classified to this day.
Really? Still?
Yeah, some aren't scheduled for release until 2029.
Wow. So it's almost as if those in power are intentionally holding back crucial pieces of the puzzle. It leaves the public wondering, what are they hiding and why?
Exactly. And this lack of transparency naturally leads to distrust and suspicion.
Of course, especially in a case as monumental and impactful as the assassination of a president.
Yeah, if there was nothing to hide, why not just release all the information and let the public draw its own conclusions?
I know. It's suspicious. It's like we're trying to solve a mystery novel, but some of the pages have been ripped out.
Right.
But even with the information we do have, there are some really obvious discrepancies and unanswered questions that you just can't ignore.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of the most hotly debated aspects of the assassination is this whole question of how many shots were fired and from where.
Right, because the Warren Commission concluded that 3 shots were fired from the Texas School Book Depository.
Right, where Oswald was supposedly perched.
But years later, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded something different. They suggested 4 shots were fired, with 1 maybe coming from the grassy knoll.
That's a pretty significant difference. And then you have the single bullet theory.
Oh, don't even get me started on the single bullet
I
theory.
know, right? It's been a source of endless debate and skepticism.
It really has.
It suggests that one single bullet passed through President Kennedy's neck and then went on to wound Governor Connally.
Who was sitting in front of him.
Yeah.
I remember, like, the first time I learned about the single bullet theory, I just thought, how is that even physically possible?
I know. It seems to, like, defy logic and the laws of physics.
Probably.
Yeah, and a lot of critics argue that the trajectory of the bullet, like based on where Kennedy and Connally were sitting in the car, just makes that scenario super improbable.
Yeah.
Some researchers have even gone so far as to recreate the scene.
Really?
Yeah. They used like ballistic dummies and high-speed cameras, and their findings basically cast serious doubt on the single bullet theory.
Wow, that's interesting. And then on top of that, you have all these eyewitness accounts that just completely contradict the official narrative.
Right, like Lee Bowers.
Oh yeah, Lee Bowers, who was working in that railroad tower overlooking Dealey Plaza, and he claimed to have seen something out of the ordinary on the grassy knoll at the time of the shooting.
Right. His account just adds to this growing body of evidence that suggests something isn't right with the official story.
Exactly. And then you have people who were there that day who swore they saw a bullet hole in the windshield of the limo.
Which, if true, would suggest a shot from the front, right?
Right. Of course, we can't forget about the Zapruder film.
Oh, yeah, the Zapruder film.
Probably the most analyzed piece of home movie footage in history.
It really is.
It captures, like, the entire assassination
The
sequence.
whole thing.
And yet, even with this visual evidence, there's still no consensus on what exactly happened.
It's wild.
It's a fascinating piece of the puzzle because, depending on who you ask, it either confirms the official narrative or completely debunks it.
Right.
Experts have, like, analyzed every frame of that film. They've studied the speed of the limousine, the timing of the shots, the movements of Kennedy and Connally, and yet they still have different conclusions about where the fatal shot came from.
It's mind-boggling. And then some people argue that the film itself may have been tampered with,
Oh, wow.
which, just adds another layer of mystery. Of course.
Hmm.
And if that weren't enough, the medical evidence is just full of inconsistencies as well.
Really?
Yeah, there are discrepancies between what the doctors at Parkland Hospital said, the ones who treated Kennedy right after the shooting, and the official autopsy report.
Like, what kind of discrepancies?
Well, a lot of the doctors at Parkland reported seeing a large exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head,
Okay.
which would support the idea of a shot from the front. But the autopsy photos and the descriptions, they don't seem to support those observations.
Well, it's like every piece of evidence we examine just leads to more questions than answers.
Exactly. And there's also conflicting information about the bullet fragments.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's unclear whether they all match up with the type of ammo that Oswald was supposedly using. And then there was that whole controversy with the acoustic evidence.
Oh, yeah, I have.
It was initially presented as proof of a second gunman, but then it was later discredited.
Right.
It just goes to show how even scientific evidence can be, subject to interpretation and manipulation.
So where does that leave us with Lee Harvey Oswald? I mean, was he just a lone wolf assassin with incredible marksmanship skills?
Yeah.
Or was he, as some believe, just a patsy, a scapegoat, to cover up something much bigger?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
This whole debate about Oswald's role in all of this just rages on to this day. I mean, official records do say that he was a decent shot when he was in the Marines.
So was he skilled enough to pull off an attack like that, under that kind of pressure?
That's what a lot of researchers question. Some argue that Oswald just didn't have the skills to execute the assassination with the speed and the accuracy that it seemingly demanded.
So if Oswald wasn't the mastermind behind this, or if he didn't act alone, then who else was involved?
Right, and that's where things get really interesting because we start venturing into the world of conspiracy theories.
Right, exactly.
From the shadowy figures in New Orleans to, like, allegations of CIA involvement. We're about to go on a journey into some of the most, compelling and controversial theories that have come out of this event.
It's going to get wild.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about the possibility of cover-ups and conflicting evidence, and of course the whole mystery surrounding Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
Now it's time to kind of delve into the world of conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
The alternative explanations that try to fill in the gaps.
Right.
And provide answers where maybe the official narrative falls short.
Because conspiracy theories, especially around something as big as the JFK assassination, they often tap into our deepest fears and anxieties.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
About, like, power and corruption, hidden agendas.
Exactly. And they kind of offer a sense of control in the face of chaos, a way to make sense of something that just seems senseless.
And I also think there's just a natural human desire to, seek justice,
Of course.
to believe that someone, somewhere, is held accountable for something so tragic.
Absolutely. So let's start with one of the most intriguing and well-developed conspiracy theories out there.
Okay.
The New Orleans connection.
Oh, yeah.
This theory focuses on a group of people that seem like they're straight out of a spy novel.
Okay.
David Ferrie, Clay Shaw, and Guy Bannister.
Right, and they were all connected to Oswald in some way.
Exactly.
And David Ferrie, he's just a fascinating figure in all of this. An eccentric ex-pilot,
Right.
Rumored photographic memory, a penchant for disguises.
It's like a movie.
Totally. He was involved in anti-Castro activities.
Oh, wow.
And he also had ties to organized crime.
And it's those kinds of connections, that
Yeah.
make Ferrie such a compelling character in all of this. He's like this link between different underworld elements
Right.
that some believe were involved in a plot against Kennedy.
And then there's Clay Shaw, a prominent businessman from New Orleans.
Right.
He was actually put on trial for conspiracy to assassinate Kennedy.
Was he convicted?
He was acquitted.
Oh, wow.
But the trial itself became this media sensation, with Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney, just arguing vehemently that Shaw was part of this CIA-backed plot to get rid of Kennedy.
Wow. And so even though Garrison failed to get a conviction, the trial really brought the New Orleans connection into the spotlight.
It did. It fueled all this speculation about a wider conspiracy.
And speaking of the CIA, their alleged involvement in the assassination is another theory that's been around forever.
It has.
Some people believe that Oswald had connections to the agency.
Right.
Maybe he was manipulated by them without even knowing it fully.
The CIA's history with all the covert operations and everything, especially in Cuba,
Right.
that has definitely provided a lot of material for conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, I mean, some people think that Kennedy's handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, his maybe softening stance toward Cuba, made him a liability to people in the intelligence community.
And then there's the testimony of Gaten Fonzi.
How's that?
He was an investigator for the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
He claimed he was pressured to not investigate Oswald's possible CIA ties too closely.
Interesting.
Yeah. And that, along with a really cryptic memo that kind of hints at President Johnson's own suspicions about the CIA's involvement, have all just added to the intrigue.
It's like everyone is suspicious of everyone.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have organized crime.
Right, which always comes up.
They had their own reasons to dislike Kennedy.
Yeah.
His brother, Robert, as Attorney General, was really cracking down on organized crime.
So some theorize they wanted revenge.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
And then you can't ignore the fact that Jack Ruby, the man who shot Oswald,
yeah.
had ties to the mob.
It's almost impossible to ignore that connection. It's like a tangled web. The more you try to unravel it, the more tangled it becomes.
Exactly. And that's the challenge with exploring these conspiracy theories.
It is.
While some are more outlandish than others,
Yeah.
a lot of them are very well researched.
Yeah.
And they present compelling arguments.
They do.
But it's just so crucial to approach them with a critical eye,
Yeah.
to really try to separate fact from speculation and consider the motivations of the people who are promoting these theories.
Absolutely.
So where does that leave us?
Right.
After decades of investigations, books, documentaries, debates, the assassination of JFK is still an enigma.
It really is. It's a puzzle with missing pieces.
Yeah. And questions that we may never have the answers to.
And I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
It does.
It forces us to question what we think we know,
Yeah.
grapple with the limits of our knowledge, and confront the possibility that the truth might be more complex than we want to believe.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this, the realization that history isn't always a neat and tidy narrative.
It's not a straight line.
Nope. Sometimes the most significant events leave us with more questions than answers.
That's true.
That's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the JFK assassination.
This was great.
Yeah. As always, we encourage you, the listener, to continue exploring, to keep asking questions, and to never stop seeking the truth wherever it might lead.